On the calm evening of January 13, 2012, the Costa Concordia, a gleaming symbol of Italian luxury and maritime engineering, departed the port of Civitavecchia, near Rome, on what was meant to be a serene Mediterranean cruise. She was one of the largest and most elegant passenger ships in the world, stretching nearly 300 meters in length and carrying more than 4,200 people on board, passengers and crew from over 70 nationalities. The sea was calm, the air mild, and the horizon promised an ordinary night of leisure, laughter, and comfort. On board, restaurants buzzed with conversation, music played softly through lounges, and travelers admired the view of the Italian coastline. Yet beneath this image of perfection, a series of decisions, errors, and failures of judgment were silently aligning to create one of the most infamous maritime disasters of the 21st century. The Costa Concordia's voyage was supposed to be routine, a round trip from Italy to France, Spain, and back again. But at the helm that evening was Captain Francesco Schettino, a man known for his charisma and confidence, but also for his tendency toward showmanship. As the ship sailed past the island of Giglio off the Tuscan coast, Schettino decided to perform what he called a saluta maneuver to bring the massive vessel unusually close to the shore so that those on land could see her illuminated decks, and passengers could enjoy a dramatic view of the island's twinkling lights. It was not the first time a cruise ship had done this, nor even the first time Schettino had performed such a display. But this time, the approach was dangerously close, and the navigation charts were not followed with precision. The electronic navigation systems, including radar and GPS, displayed the ship's proximity to underwater rocks known to local sailors as l'Iscole, but Schettino relied on visual estimation rather than instrumentation. Within minutes, the decision would prove catastrophic. At 9:45 p.m., as the Costa Concordia glided majestically near the island, the passengers were still dining, unaware of the danger beneath them. Suddenly, at 9:45 and 7 seconds, the ship's hull struck an underwater reef just off Giglio. A deep, metallic groan shuddered through the decks, followed by a violent jolt. Plates fell, glasses shattered, and lights flickered. Many passengers thought it was an earthquake or perhaps turbulence from the sea. But deep in the belly of the ship, seawater began pouring through a long gash in the port side of the hull over 50 meters long. The impact immediately flooded multiple compartments, disabling the ship's electrical systems and leaving the engine rooms powerless. Within seconds, alarms sounded in the control room. The ship was taking on water fast. Engineers scrambled to seal bulkheads, but the damage was beyond containment. Yet on the bridge, the situation was met with confusion and disbelief. Captain Schettino and his officers hesitated, unsure of the extent of the damage. Emergency procedures were delayed as the crew debated whether the ship could still be maneuvered back toward the shallow coast. The Concordia's massive size and momentum worked against them. Water filled her lower decks unevenly, causing a slow but deadly list to the starboard side. Passengers began to sense that something was terribly wrong. Power flickered off entirely for several minutes, plunging the ship into darkness before emergency generators kicked in. Elevators stopped. Corridors tilted. Crew members offered reassurances in multiple languages, telling passengers to remain calm, that it was only an electrical issue. But the growing angle of the decks and the unmistakable sound of rushing water below shattered any illusion of control. By 10 p.m., the ship was already leaning noticeably. In the engine room, the technical staff reported irreversible flooding. Still, the order to abandon ship did not come. On the bridge, Schettino contacted Costa Concordia's crisis center in Genoa, downplaying the situation. "We have a blackout," he said, withholding that the hull had been breached. This delay nearly half an hour proved fatal for many who might have escaped earlier. When the truth could no longer be denied, the panic was already spreading. By 10:30 p.m., the Costa Concordia was lying heavily on her side, its elegant decks now steep, slippery slopes. Passengers stumbled through dark corridors, struggling to climb uphill toward lifeboats that were quickly becoming useless as the ship tilted. Only then did the captain finally give the order to abandon ship, an order that came far too late. The crew, undertrained for such a massive evacuation, faced chaos. Lifeboats on the high side could no longer be launched properly due to the steep list, while those on the low side risked being crushed against the hull by the tilting motion. In the darkness and confusion, people screamed, slipped, and clung to rails. Families were separated, communication systems failed, and the crew's conflicting instructions added to the terror. Over 4,000 people were now trapped on a dying ship, minutes away from capsizing on the rocks of Giglio. As chaos spread through the decks, passengers who had moments before been enjoying fine dining and music now fought for survival. The ship's internal alarms blared, echoing through the tilting corridors like a heartbeat of panic. Some crew members heroically tried to calm people, guiding them toward the evacuation points, but the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. The Concordia had lost nearly all power, and communication with the Coast Guard was intermittent. On the island of Giglio, local residents began noticing strange lights in the darkness, followed by the eerie sound of distress signals. At 10:42 p.m., the Italian Coast Guard in Livorno received a call reporting that the Costa Concordia had suffered an electrical failure. It would take several more critical minutes before they realized the full scale of the disaster. Meanwhile, on board, the tilt of the ship was increasing rapidly. Tables and chairs slid across floors, glass shattered, and water surged through lower passageways. For many, escape routes were already blocked. Passengers clung to stair railings, crawling upward through what was once level flooring. The sound of rushing seawater mixed with the terrified cries of men, women, and children. Yet even as the ship leaned heavily to starboard, the official announcements still advised passengers to stay calm and await instructions. By 10:50 p.m., confusion turned to full-blown panic. The ship had lost its orientation, decks once parallel to the sea were now steep, slippery walls. Crew members struggled to deploy lifeboats, many of which swung wildly as the angle worsened. Some lifeboats made it safely into the water, but others dropped unevenly, throwing passengers into the dark, cold sea. People began jumping overboard in desperation, their bright life jackets illuminated by the ship's emergency lights. At 11 p.m., after repeated calls, the Coast Guard demanded that the captain give a clear order to abandon ship. Captain Francesco Schettino finally relayed the command, but precious time had already been lost. The vessel was now lying heavily on its side, with much of its starboard flank submerged. On Giglio, the local harbour master, Gregorio de Falco, tried urgently to communicate with Schettino by radio, ordering him to coordinate the evacuation and return to the bridge. But Schettino had already left the vessel in the chaos, reaching a lifeboat amid the confusion, a decision that would later spark global outrage and be condemned as a failure of duty. The evacuation continued chaotically through the night. Many passengers were helped by brave crew members, others by fellow travelers who refused to leave without helping the injured and elderly. The water near the island was icy, and currents pushed some lifeboats dangerously close to rocks. Local fishermen and residents of Giglio Island responded heroically, launching their small boats into the dark waters to rescue survivors. They pulled shivering passengers from the sea, wrapped them in blankets, and guided them toward the island's small port, which soon became an improvised triage center. The Church of Giglio Porto opened its doors as a temporary shelter, filled with shocked, drenched, and trembling survivors who could not yet comprehend what had happened. Helicopters hovered above, lowering rescue baskets and spotlights that illuminated the enormous, half-submerged hull of the Costa Concordia, once a floating palace, now a wounded giant lying helplessly on her side just meters from the shore. By midnight, most of the upper decks were completely submerged, and the ship had come to rest on a rocky ledge under the water, preventing it from sinking entirely. This accidental grounding, though disastrous, also prevented a greater catastrophe. Had the ship slid deeper into the sea, thousands more lives could have been lost. Over the next several hours, the rescue operation intensified. Divers entered the flooded sections searching for trapped survivors, while Coast Guard and Fire Department units coordinated from shore. The conditions were perilous: darkness, freezing water, and the unstable position of the ship made every movement dangerous. Still, rescuers worked tirelessly through the night and into the next day. By dawn, more than 4,000 people had been rescued, though 32 souls would never return. Their loss marked one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters in modern European history. In the days that followed, the world watched in disbelief as images of the capsized cruise liner dominated the news. The Costa Concordia, once a symbol of luxury, lay broken and half-submerged off the Tuscan coast, her name forever associated with tragedy. Investigators immediately launched inquiries into how a modern, technologically advanced vessel could have suffered such a catastrophic failure so close to shore. The black box data, bridge communications, and testimony from crew members revealed a troubling chain of human errors. The fateful salute maneuver had taken the ship dangerously close to uncharted shallow waters. The delay in raising the alarm, the failure to immediately inform the Coast Guard of the collision, and the confusion during evacuation all pointed to a breakdown in leadership and protocol. Captain Schettino, who had left the ship before the evacuation was complete, became the focal point of public anger. Recordings of his radio exchanges with Coast Guard officer Gregorio de Falco went viral worldwide, including de Falco's now famous order, "Get back on board, damn it!" a phrase that became symbolic of the outrage against Schettino's abandonment of duty. In the months that followed, recovery and salvage operations began on a scale never before attempted. The Costa Concordia, weighing over 114,000 tons, posed an environmental and logistical nightmare. Fuel removal was the first priority to prevent ecological damage to the pristine Giglio waters. Specialized salvage teams from around the world converged on the site, studying how to refloat the massive vessel without causing it to break apart. The operation, called Project Parbuckling, took more than 2 years and became the largest maritime salvage effort in history. Engineers designed an intricate system of cranes, cables, and flotation tanks to slowly rotate the ship upright. In September 2013, after months of preparation, the world watched live as the Costa Concordia was painstakingly lifted from its resting place, a process that lasted 19 hours. It was a moment of relief and closure for many, though the haunting image of the ruined liner stood as a lasting reminder of human error and hubris. By 2014, the ship was finally refloated and towed to the port of Genoa to be dismantled for scrap, marking the end of her existence. The investigation concluded that the disaster was entirely preventable. Captain Schettino was charged with multiple counts, including manslaughter, abandoning ship, and causing a shipwreck. In 2017, Italy's highest court upheld his 16-year prison sentence, closing a painful chapter in maritime history. The tragedy of the Costa Concordia led to sweeping changes in the cruise industry. New international safety regulations were introduced, mandating stricter evacuation training, real-time tracking of ship movements, and improved communication protocols between vessels and coast guards. Cruise lines also adopted more rigorous standards for emergency drills and command accountability. Yet, beyond the technical lessons and legal